Alrighty, good afternoon, folks. Thank you for your patience. Thank you for waiting. We have another Master Gardener series today, and Nick will be teaching us about soil. So welcome, Nick. We'll get right into it, and please type in your questions via chat, and we'll address them towards the end of the talk. So welcome again.
Thank you, Ken. You all know that healthy soil is a prerequisite to productive gardening. The belief that soil is simply a vehicle to anchor plants and chemical nutrients can be added as needed for success is outdated by decades. Healthy soil, supporting a robust soil food web, is capable of providing all the nutrition for vigorous plant growth and development. Today, I would like to focus on three nutrient cycles for which soil plays an integral role. These three, the water, the nitrogen, and the carbon cycle, are crucial to plant existence and ecosystem health, and soil is at the center of their functioning. Let's begin with the water or hydrologic cycle. Here's the complete water cycle. I'm sure you're familiar with all the ways water moves around the earth, but I think there is value in examining them collectively and highlighting the participation of soil in these movements. Water is in constant motion, moving around the earth and between three physical states: liquid water, water vapor, and solid water or ice. Water on earth is essentially conserved. The water you drink today may well have been in a lake from which dinosaurs drank over 100 million years ago. Let's talk about the specific steps in the water cycle. There are three mechanisms by which water can move into the atmosphere. Evaporation, which is water transitioning from a liquid to a gas, with which I'm sure you are familiar. Transpiration, which is the water vapor emitted by plant leaves. And sublimation, where ice transitions directly to water vapor. There's also evapotranspiration, which is a combination of transpiration and evaporation from the soil over a specific area. Evapotranspiration measures all the water leaving a vegetative spot. Water vapor can also be subjected to condensation, which occurs as water vapor rises in the atmosphere and cools. Condensation happens at the dew point, which is the temperature at which air becomes saturated with water, causing water vapor to condense into liquid water. Once the condensed water droplets grow too large to be supported by the rising air, the water returns to Earth as precipitation. This can take four forms: rain, hail, snow, or sleet. Precipitation is the primary way water returns to the Earth's surface. Once water returns to the Earth's surface, it can take a couple of different paths. Runoff is the visible flow of water and occurs when the soil is saturated or severely compacted. Runoff can form rivers or creeks and will flow into lakes and oceans. Of course, it can evaporate and return to water vapor during this journey. Alternatively, water can enter the soil. Infiltration is the movement of water into the soil via cracks and pores. The movement of water through the soil is referred to as percolation. Once water infiltrates and percolates through the soil, it becomes groundwater, filling the cracks, pores, and spaces in underground soil and rock layers, essentially saturating that space. These areas are referred to as aquifers. The upper surface of this saturated zone is referred to as the water table. Groundwater contains 30% of the Earth's fresh water supply. and groundwater holds approximately 50% of the supply of drinking water. It is worth mentioning that fresh water makes up only 2.5% of the water on Earth, of which, as I've mentioned, 30% resides in groundwater. Over 97% of the Earth's water is contained in the oceans. It is clear that soil has significant involvement in the water cycle. It facilitates water infiltration into and percolation through the Earth's surface and mediates groundwater replenishment. It acts as a reservoir to store and retain water, and in some cases, it can act as a natural filter. The involvement of soil in the water cycle is not always positive. Water runoff can lead to loss of topsoil and degradation of soil quality. Sediment particles can negatively affect water quality. Contaminated soil can lead to transfer of contaminants to the water. And nutrient runoff can lead to something called eutrophication. Eutrophication occurs when runoff and leaching from the soil carries sediment and excess nutrients, primarily nitrogen and phosphorus, into a body of water. This results in an overgrowth of algae with possible toxin production and depletion of oxygen, resulting in the death of water life. Eutrophication does not only occur in small bodies of water. This is a satellite image of Lake Erie from 2011, a year in which it experienced a significant eutrophication event. The lake is 250 miles wide, and you can see the extent of the algal growth nourished by runoff from the northern coast of Ohio on the south side and the southern coast of Canada on the north. This picture is from several hundred miles above the surface. It's somewhat attractive. That's not the case if you go down to the surface. The extensive algal growth depletes the oxygen from the water. And this is very detrimental to water life. Of course, humans have a significant effect on the water cycle. We withdraw and redirect water. We build dams and reservoirs. Deforestation significantly alters the evapotranspiration of a forest, and urbanization disrupts water infiltration and thus percolation. And of course, pollution from runoff is also a concern. I have told you that groundwater contains approximately 50% of the drinking water supply, and I want to alert you of the concern of aquifer depletion. This short video displays the groundwater level trends in California for the 65 years between 1957 and 2022. The red will indicate depletion, and the blue indicates recharging. Let's watch. You can see that while there is occasional recharging, the overwhelming trend is toward depletion. This problem is not unique to California. This video looks at the groundwater trends throughout the continental United States for the same time frame, 1957 to 2022. Again, the overwhelming trend is troubling, with significant depletion of the aquifers. That concludes what I would like to say about the water cycle. I hope you now have a good grasp of that cycle and the significant role that soil plays. Now, let's discuss the nitrogen cycle, an important series of reactions essential to the ability of plants to access nitrogen. The nitrogen cycle is the rotation of nitrogen through various forms driven by chemical and biological processes. You know nitrogen is a primary nutrient for plants. The Earth's atmosphere is approximately 78% nitrogen. But ironically, plants cannot utilize this form of nitrogen. Atmospheric nitrogen needs to be processed into a form that plants can utilize, and that is the role of the nitrogen cycle. This figure depicts the nitrogen cycle. As I have mentioned, this cycle is the rotation of nitrogen through various chemical forms that transforms the atmospheric form of this element, which plants cannot use, into nitrogen-containing molecules that plants can use. There are 5 fundamental reactions that comprise the nitrogen cycle: nitrogen fixation, nitrification, assimilation, ammonification, and denitrification. Before I go through these processes in more detail, I would like to introduce you to the nitrogen-containing molecules that participate in this process. This is a little bit of chemistry, but don't despair. These are the chemical forms of nitrogen that participate in this cycle. Nitrogen atoms are represented by N, hydrogen atoms by H, and oxygen atoms by O. The upper middle represents atmospheric nitrogen. Atmospheric nitrogen consists of 2 atoms of nitrogen. The blue bars between the nitrogen atoms and throughout this figure represent covalent bonds. A covalent bond is the strongest bond in chemistry, and in atmospheric nitrogen, the 2 nitrogen atoms are joined by 3 covalent bonds. This is the primary reason why plants cannot access atmospheric nitrogen. Plants do not have the energy or the enzymatic machinery to break 3 covalent bonds. On the far left of the slide is a representation of ammonium. Ammonium consists of 4 hydrogen atoms bound to a single nitrogen atom. The nitrogen in ammonium can be used by plants. To the right of ammonium is a representation of nitrate. Nitrate is a single atom of nitrogen joined by 3 oxygen atoms through individual covalent bonds. This is a form of nitrogen available to and most preferred by plants, and is the basis of many chemical fertilizers. To the right of nitrate is a depiction of the nitrite molecule. Nitrite consists of 1 atom of nitrogen bound to 2 atoms of oxygen. There are 2 covalent bonds between the nitrogen and one of the oxygen atoms, and 1 covalent bond between the nitrogen and the other oxygen atom. Technically, plants can use the nitrogen in nitrite, although it is not a preferred form, and in fact can be toxic to the plant at some concentrations. At the far right of the slide is a portrayal of nitrous oxide. Nitrous oxide is 2 nitrogen atoms joined by 3 covalent bonds, together with 1 oxygen atom attached by a single covalent bond. The nitrogen in nitrous oxide cannot be used by plants. Nitrous oxide can be a minor byproduct of the nitrogen cycle, and it is a potent greenhouse gas. Except for atmospheric nitrogen, all of these molecules have an electrical charge, but those charges are somewhat irrelevant to this discussion, so they have been omitted from this slide. Now, these are stick figure representations of these molecules to focus on the covalent bonds. Here are space-filling models of these same molecules. This is a more accurate representation of the molecule's 3D structure. Nitrogen atoms are blue, oxygen atoms are red, and hydrogen atoms are white. A major step of the nitrogen cycle is nitrogen fixation. This process is shown here. Certain bacteria referred to as diazotrophs, convert atmospheric nitrogen to ammonium. Recall that atmospheric nitrogen is not accessible to plants. However, the nitrogen in ammonium can be utilized by plants. Nitrogen fixation is the primary way atmospheric nitrogen enters the nitrogen cycle and enters the soil in a form that plants can use. You may have noticed this lightning bolt in the upper left of this figure. As you can imagine, lightning has a lot of energy, and it is capable of breaking those 3 covalent bonds in atmospheric nitrogen and producing nitrates, which can subsequently enter the soil. A relatively small amount of nitrogen fixation is mediated by lightning. The vast majority is due to soil microbes. Another step in the nitrogen cycle is referred to as nitrification. Nitrification is a 2-step process involving 2 different types of bacteria. In the first step, Nitrosomonas species convert ammonium to nitrite. In the second step, another type of bacteria, Nitrobacter species, converts the nitrite to nitrate. Remember that while the nitrogen in ammonium can be used by plants, the nitrogen in nitrite is not preferred by plants and in fact can be toxic. Once the nitrite has been transformed to nitrate, the nitrogen is once again available for use by plants. Here is where the 2-step nitrification process resides in the cycle, generating nitrate from the ammonium, which is the product of nitrogen fixation. Now, there are 3 additional reactions in the nitrogen cycle, and I will not go into detail, but I do want you to be aware of these, so I will just define them quickly. Assimilation is the process by which plants use available nitrogen to make key molecules the plant requires for growth and development, such as amino acids and DNA. Ammonification is the process by which bacteria and fungi degrade organic material, releasing the incorporated nitrogen as ammonium, which can then be reutilized by the plants. And denitrification, which primarily occurs under low oxygen conditions, is the process by which bacteria transform nitrates back into nitrogen gas, which returns to the atmosphere. While I have mostly mentioned bacterial involvement in the nitrogen cycle, you need to be aware that fungal species are also extensively involved. They play a major role in organic material decomposition, which is ammonification. Some fungi, specifically mycorrhizal fungi, can partner with nitrogen-fixing bacteria to the benefit of the plant. Fungi can also contribute to both nitrification and denitrification. This is another diagram of the nitrogen cycle. It is essentially identical to the one which I've previously shown you, but I want to use this version to make another point. This is the natural or unmanipulated nitrogen cycle that I have described to you. Unfortunately, the nitrogen cycle is very easy to manipulate. To manipulate the nitrogen cycle, an external source of nitrate can be added to the soil. For example, in the form of nitrate-based chemical fertilizers, such as sodium, potassium, or ammonium nitrate. However, this type of addition has a detrimental effect on the nitrogen cycle as a whole. When excess external nitrate is added to the soil in the form of chemical fertilizers, it certainly provide the plants with an available form of nitrogen, but this will circumvent much of the natural nitrogen cycle. This is detrimental to the soil life that is the foundation of the nitrogen cycle and is thus damaging to the entire soil food web. This is why it's so important to use organic fertilizers, which feed all the soil life, rather than chemical or inorganic fertilizers, which have the very narrow activity of only feeding the plant. Another undesirable effect of using inorganic fertilizers, especially in excess, is the production of nitrous oxide, which is a powerful greenhouse gas. Remember, while nitrous oxide is produced in small quantities during the nitrogen cycle, excess amounts of ammonium and nitrate, for example, by the addition of inorganic fertilizers, can lead to significant nitrous oxide emission into the atmosphere, especially under conditions where there is little or no oxygen, such as in poorly aerated or compacted soil. While carbon dioxide is responsible for a significant portion of atmospheric warming, nitrous oxide, along with methane, are significant and increasing contributors. This slide depicts how excess ammonium and nitrate can lead to the generation and release of nitrous oxide into the atmosphere via the nitrification and denitrification processes under low oxygen levels. I hope you now understand that organic fertilizers are much more favorable to the plant and soil life than are their chemical counterparts. But in surplus, organic fertilizers can also be detrimental. An overabundance of organic fertilizers can increase ammonium and nitrate levels that can result in soil acidification and root burn, contaminate groundwater via nitrate leaching, and negatively impact soil structure by destroying soil aggregates and leading to compaction. Thus, organic fertilizers should always be applied at the manufacturer recommended rate. Of course, we humans have an impact on the nitrogen cycle, and not just by using chemical nitrogen-based fertilizers. Humans are responsible for the release of significant amount of nitrogen into the environment by the combustion of fossil fuels, livestock farming, sewage treatment, and industrial emissions. You can see that the soil is intimately involved in the nitrogen cycle. It serves as both a reservoir for the bacteria and fungi crucial to the cycle, as well as the site where the cycle takes place. Having healthy soil is essential for an efficient nitrogen cycle. However, when soil is contaminated by excess nitrogen compounds, such as chemical fertilizers, animal manures, or excess organic fertilizers, soil is an unwitting participant in activities detrimental to the environment, such as contamination of aquifers and waterways with nitrogen, as well as the release of nitrous oxide into the atmosphere. That concludes the nitrogen cycle. Now let's move to the carbon cycle. The carbon cycle is the movement of carbon-containing molecules through the lithosphere, which contains soil, the atmosphere, the hydrosphere, and the biosphere, which contains all life on Earth. Here is a simple diagram of the carbon cycle, showing the rotation of carbon through these various carbon pools. Now, the ocean plays a significant role in the carbon cycle, but I'm not going to talk about that today. We are going to focus on the movement of carbon between the atmosphere, the soil, and living organisms. The carbon cycle can be divided into two subcycles, a fast or active carbon cycle and a slow or stable carbon cycle. Active cycling carbon is carbon that is easily altered and has a relatively rapid turnover rate, decaying in the order of days to months, and is easily digested by the soil microbial community. Think of a tree taking in carbon dioxide from the atmosphere to grow leaves, and after several months, those leaves falling from the tree and decaying into soil organic material. This is a good example of the active carbon cycle. A stable or slow cycling carbon pool in the soil is that which has become physically or chemically protected from degradation. This carbon pool has a much slower turnover rate due to the protection from microbial attack and the reduction of oxygen as the carbon becomes chemically bound to clay and minerals and physically protected within soil aggregates. Organic carbon protected in these ways can exist in the soil for years to centuries. Once this protection is lost, or oxygen is introduced into the soil, the carbon enters back into the active cycle and can be released as carbon dioxide. Think of all the organic material from millions of years ago that has been transformed into fossil fuels, such as oil and natural gas. This is an example of the stable carbon cycle. Here's a slightly modified figure of the carbon cycle that I've previously shown you. This slide represents the carbon cycle in the absence of human activity. You know carbon dioxide is taken from the atmosphere by plants and turned into sugars or other organic or carbon-containing molecules. This material can decay into soil organic material or be consumed by animals, which causes some of the carbon to be released into the atmosphere as CO2 through respiration. Thus, there is this constant cycling of carbon between atmospheric CO2 and organic forms of carbon. This slide focuses on the carbon cycle mediated by plants. When they are photosynthesizing, plants take in carbon dioxide and produce sugars and other organic molecules, and of course release oxygen. Plants also use respiration to grow and develop, causing it to consume oxygen and some of the manufactured sugars. This releases carbon dioxide back into the atmosphere. The amount of CO2, however, taken in by the plant during photosynthesis can be up to 10 times more the amount that it releases through respiration. So there is always a net decrease in atmospheric CO2. While decaying plant material is a significant source of soil carbon, plants also introduce carbon into the soil through the exudates that they secrete through their roots. The growth of soil microbes that consume these exudates is another way that carbon is added to the soil. I have been talking about the carbon cycle in the absence of human activity. Of course, it's not realistic. This is the carbon cycle inclusive of human activity, involving the combustion of fossil fuels. This adds carbon dioxide to the atmosphere, depicted on the right of this figure. The burning of fossil fuels essentially moves carbon from the stable carbon cycle to the active carbon cycle. The active carbon cycle cannot adequately process this additional carbon dioxide. This results in an increase in the level of atmospheric carbon dioxide, which is responsible for global warming and thus climate change. The use of fossil fuels by humans is not the only activity that releases carbon dioxide to the atmosphere. Deforestation releases the carbon stored within the trees and eliminates the carbon dioxide that the trees removed from the air. Again, the end result is an increase in atmospheric carbon dioxide. I would like to talk a bit more about carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. You know that since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, atmospheric carbon dioxide has steadily increased. This slide shows both that increase and the rate that is also increasing. The increasing levels are indicated by a variation from light yellow to darker orange. In 2002, there were 374 parts per million of CO2 in the atmosphere. 6 years later, it had risen to 384 parts per million, an increase of 10 parts per million. 7 years after that, it was 401 parts per million, an increase of 17 parts per million. And 7 years after that, it had increased to 419 parts per million, an increase of 18 parts per million. Today, there are 430 parts per million of CO2 in the atmosphere, an increase of 11 parts per million in just 4 years. I would now like to show you a short video. You may have seen this video before. It's somewhat dated, but I think it is important because it makes some points more convincingly visually than I can verbally. This will show a year of atmospheric carbon dioxide levels in the Earth's atmosphere. The light blue and yellow colors are lower levels, and the red and purple colors are higher levels. The timeline is indicated on the bottom left of the slide. Don't worry about that. Focus on the map, and I will narrate the timeline. We are starting in January. You can see there are some areas of higher CO2 concentration, and that increases as we move through February and March. This is concentrated in the Northern Hemisphere, where 68% of the land and 90% of the population resides. Things seem to peak towards the end of April. As we move through May, however, the CO2 concentration begins decreasing. What is happening? The vegetation in the Northern Hemisphere is awakening and removing CO2 from the atmosphere. This continues throughout June and July and into August. That 4-inch tomato seedling you planted in April is now over 6 foot tall and producing a bounty of tomatoes, having required abundant CO2 and sunshine to get there. The CO2 concentration continues to decrease, reaching the minimum in mid to late October. As we move into November and December, the vegetation has gone dormant, and the removal of atmospheric CO2 has decreased substantially, and the levels increase. Here are the key points from the last 2 slides I've shown. Atmospheric carbon dioxide levels are increasing in an elevated place. 20 years ago, it was increasing 1 to 2 parts per year. Now it is increasing at double that rate. CO2 levels are dynamic at any given time across the globe and at any given location during the year. When you see a number for atmospheric carbon dioxide, it is the average over a period of time. The last video shows that these levels are dynamic in both time and location. And finally, atmospheric carbon dioxide levels are significantly influenced by photosynthesis. And thus, having healthy soil and correspondingly vigorous plant life is important to carbon removal from the atmosphere. So I think it is obvious that healthy soil is very important to carbon removal from the atmosphere and has a strong influence on the carbon cycle. In conclusion, I hope you can now see that soil is at the center of 3 important nutrient cycles: water, nitrogen, and carbon. And healthy soil is essential to the optimal functioning of all 3. I want to thank Can for moderating this discussion, Terry Lingso and Lingso Materials for supporting the seminar series, and you for your attention today. I can now attempt to answer any questions you have.
Okay, folks, I don't have any questions, Nick, but I'm going to open up the questions via chat. Go ahead and send them in. You'll see ask questions here. If you have any questions, send them in and we'll address them. Okay. None so far.
Well, I'll take the optimistic interpretation that I was very clear.
Oh, okay, they're coming in. Okay, so here's the first one. So wondering if you can explain deforestation a bit more. What exactly is it? Man-made? Question mark.
Yeah, deforestation is simply the removal of a forest, most frequently with the intent of reusing that area for agriculture or livestock grazing. The for fully grown forest is a tremendous pool of carbon held in the wood of the trees and roots of the trees, carbon held in all the other vegetation in the forest. And once that's removed, that carbon now is available for simple degradation by bacteria, which basically um, causes the bacteria through respiration to degrade that material, and respiration will basically put the carbon dioxide back into the atmosphere. And then also you lose the capacity of that particular area to remove carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. While much of it is replanted for grazing or agriculture, it doesn't approximate the amount of carbon dioxide that a fully mature forest can remove. So that's why there's a problem. And yes, I mean, it is always human caused.
Okay, thank you, Nick. I don't have any other questions. I think that was it.
Okay.
Well, thank you, everybody. Thank you, Nick. Appreciate this class, and it'll be available on our community resources page. If you do have any future questions, please do send us an email, or you can visit the Master Gardener's website. And can they walk in during these hours, Nick?
Yes, these hours when the area is staffed.
Okay, fantastic. Oh, all right. Well, here's another question that came in. We've got time. So,
Okay.
what do you think of natural amendments with endomycorrhizae and worm castings? Soil in their yard is tired from years of neglect, so they're trying to feed it and replant a native garden.
Yeah, I think it's a good strategy. The most important thing you can remember is to treat that soil as a living organism. Because that's what it is, basically. It's supporting all the soil life. And so always keep it hydrated, never let it dry out completely. Always be adding organic material, because once you have that organic material, the soil life will take over and degrade that into nutrients that the plants can use. So really, the key point is take care of your soil, and the soil will take care of the plants.
Very true. Alrighty. Well, any other questions before we sign off? Yep, here's one. How do you try to help promote soil that's closest to what the native soil where you live is supposed to be like? I guess how do you mimic a native soil on site, essentially?
Right. Well, when you think of what happens in nature, native soil is really built from the organic material that is shed from native plants, basically. So if you have an area that's planted with native plants, the organic material that those plants shed will help build the soil back to what native soil is. So all the organic material, all the debris that falls off the plant's leaves, things like that, any roots that degrade after the plant dies, uh, all those things basically will approximate bringing the plant back to its native configuration.
Okay. I'm pausing here just for any more questions. All right. I think that's pretty much a wrap. Nick, do you have any closing remarks for your talk?
No, that pretty much covers it. I thank you very much for this opportunity.
Yeah. All righty. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Nick. Have a good one, folks.